It has been 2 years since the military coup in Myanmar, with violence erupting between government forces and armed resistance. Over 1 million Myanmar asylum seekers and refugees have been displaced. But instead of finding refuge in their neighboring countries, many have not been met with welcome.
I got it 53 people right now in jail. Some people are still we cannot contact.
What is worrying is the immigration department and the Myanmar government in deporting Myanmar refugees from Malaysia. These people will be crucified when they go back.
Why have Myanmar refugees been unable to find safe haven?
Yeah, it's very sad being political tools.
On a quiet night in 2010, James Bowie Tangbik snuck out of his orphanage in the Chin state in Myanmar. At just 16 years old, he was to be smuggled alone into Malaysia by human traffickers, also known as agents.
When I recall my past, I was so shocked, and then how I was so brave. I never met the agents, and I did not know him. I think 4 a.m., 3 a.m., then I went to where he gave me the appointments, and then he brought me just like a child who came to Malaysia.
The majority Christian Chin community had experienced decades of forced assimilation into Buddhist majority Myanmar, leading to armed conflict. To escape the violence, James' mother, who was living in Malaysia then, paid for him to be smuggled and reunited with her.
When I met my mom, it's very emotional, and then it's very hard to express. Of course, just crying, hugging my mom. I didn't believe that, oh, this is my biological mom, and then I'm gonna have the chance to live with my mom.
People like James, who seek protection in other countries, are considered asylum seekers. When their status is legally recognized by their host country, they are considered refugees and afforded more rights. James was granted refugee status in 2013, which allows him to live and study conditionally in Malaysia. As a vocal critic of the Myanmar government, James would likely face persecution if he were to return home. So when he heard the news that over 1,200 Myanmar nationals like him were repatriated from Malaysia in February 2021, he was left angry and shaken.
The military government in Myanmar, they sent 3 Navy ships to pick up those detainees in Malaysia. So at the time, so we against, and even like Asylum Access and Amnesty, they brought up the case against immigrations at the courts to stop the deportation. But then the government, they didn't listen to what the court said, even though the court ordered them to hold back, but then they still process it.
Since then, the deportations have continued. According to Human Rights Watch, Malaysian immigration authorities have since forcibly returned over 2,000 Myanmar nationals between April to October 2022.
It's not really appropriate, and it's not the right time for refugees to be deported back to Myanmar, because we all know about the situations in Myanmar. Military coup happens.
A coup d'etat in Myanmar began on the morning of February 1st, 2021. Democratically elected members of the country's ruling party, the National League for Democracy, including its leader Aung San Suu Kyi, were deposed by the Tatmadaw, Myanmar's military. Power was then invested in a military government. In response to the coup, dissenters orchestrated mass protests.
Of course, the youth, college students, they hold arms Because the first they took a peaceful protest against the military coup, but then the military respond them with guns and with weapons, killing many young people.
According to numbers collated by local non-governmental organizations, about 16,000 had been detained and at least 2,300 had been killed by the end of 2022. UNHCR, or the United Nations Refugee Agency, reports that over 1 million Myanmar refugees and asylum seekers have fled to neighboring countries as of June 30th, 2022. Some due to the Rohingya refugee crisis, others to escape the violence that followed the coup. 28-year-old May Tu was one of them. To escape armed conflict, May Tu left Chin State in Myanmar in 2022 and travelled to Malaysia through Thailand. The journey took her over a week. Young women are especially vulnerable to assault by the agents they pay to smuggle them into Malaysia. But many like May still make the journey. Upon arriving in Malaysia, May settled in Pudu, Kuala Lumpur, a neighbourhood with a strong Myanmar community. Meanwhile, 2 years on from the coup, violence in Myanmar continues. In a move to pressure the military to end the conflict, ASEAN proposed a 5-point consensus. The plan, agreed to in April 2021 by 9 ASEAN leaders, including Myanmar's leader Min Aung Hlaing, called for an immediate end to violence in the country, humanitarian assistance provided by ASEAN, dialogue among all parties, the appointment of a special envoy, and allowing the envoy's visit to Myanmar. Until these conditions are met, Myanmar would be excluded from all high-level ASEAN meetings. Malaysia's former Foreign Minister, Saifuddin Abdullah, was a key figure in drafting the agreement.
Malaysia have proposed the framework which has a clear end game. There must be ceasefire, there must be enhanced humanitarian assistance that is inclusive and fair, and then there must be a proper transition plan with a proper transition authority so that Myanmar can go back on the road of democracy. This is not going to be easy, but we are very hopeful that with the chair, now Indonesia as the chair, we can do something better.
However, the aims of the 5-point consensus have largely not been met.
After 2 years, ASEAN has nothing to show for, except to show that, come out with numbers like, okay, 70 million suffering from humanitarian crisis, so many people have been killed. That I too can say, though. I too can say. You don't need governments to come and say those things.
Charles Santiago is a Malaysian politician from the Democratic Action Party, a component party of the ruling Pakatan Harapan coalition. He has served as chairman of the Human Rights and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee since December 2019.
It's time to say that we are committed to restoration of democracy in Myanmar. But the thing is, there's no political will. And that's partly because in the case of Myanmar, ASEAN is divided.
While countries like Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia had criticized the violence in Myanmar, others have refrained from doing so. For example, Thailand's government, which itself came to power in a coup in 2014, has so far avoided condemning the Myanmar military, calling the coup an internal affair of the country.
There are many more things that ASEAN could do, I think, and it just takes some kind of political will. It takes each of the individual countries to be able to speak up and voice their opinions in a more forthright, forceful manner. More forthright than ASEAN would generally be used to, I think.
ASEAN works on consensus, but unfortunately, the 5-point consensus show no progress thus far, and this is really unfortunate.
With progress on the 5-point consensus slow, violence continues in Myanmar, particularly in the Chin and Kachin state. The military has now resorted to airstrikes to target rebels.
They don't just look at which one is civilian, they just bomb everywhere. So then they burn down, and so even like many towns and many villages have been displaced.
As the conflict drove many to leave their homes, some countries in the region were favored as destinations, including India, Thailand, and Malaysia.
Malaysia has always been on the receiving end of refugees within the region. I think where we are geographically situated, it's just been a very natural place for refugees to come. We share borders with many countries in the Indochina region, and the bulk of the 187,000 or so documented refugees in Malaysia, the large majority of those actually do come from Myanmar.
Malaysia is diverse, and then because of the cultures, even though it's not a signatory country to UNHCR, but then compared to other neighbor countries, they are more respectful in terms of human rights.
As of end November 2022, there were almost 183,000 refugees and asylum seekers registered with UNHCR in Malaysia. While asylum seekers have limited rights, they are usually left to their own devices by Malaysian authorities. But the mood has begun to turn. A shocking announcement in September 2022 threatened to leave thousands of hopeful refugees in limbo. Anthony came to Malaysia in 2012. He left Myanmar after he was subjected to forced labor by the military. Anthony is the current chairman of the Palay Tuan Kumi Community Alliance in Malaysia. He works alongside James Bowie, who served as consultant while pursuing a law degree. They help other asylum seekers from Myanmar register with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees office here. Obtaining refugee status from the UNHCR provides them some protection against arrests and access to aid services provided by the organization. To register, asylum seekers first must submit their request for an appointment via an online platform. They receive an automated reply that holds no legal value but serves as the only proof that they are waiting to be granted refugee status. Anthony himself has held a UN registration card since 2013, but his family has not been able to obtain one. While Malaysia has been traditionally tolerant of refugees, there were signs that the winds were shifting. In September 2022, the country's National Security Council proposed to close its UNHCR office and take over its duties of registering refugees internally.
For refugees, UNHCR, their life source in Malaysia, so it's very important, but then the government, they just want to shut it down. So this kind of things never happened before. We can evidence how they are aggressive to all refugees.
This announcement follows a series of developments beginning in 2020 that signaled the hardening of Malaysia's policy toward asylum seekers and refugees.
The previous Home Minister, Hamzah Zainuddin, he was a bit more harsh on the refugees. During his tenure, there were more raids happening compared to how it was before that. There was one video that went really viral, was a bunch of, we're not sure whether they were refugees or undocumented migrant workers. They were told to sit on the ground and they were spraying Dettol on them, and it was very inhumane to look at that.
Elil Ezwaran has been a journalist for over 8 years. He's published a large body of work on refugees' livelihoods and how they've coped during the pandemic.
I've personally been to like 1 or 2 raids, so it happens in the late hours, like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and we just end up going to like a construction site and then start raiding there, and then we see who are the documented ones and who are the undocumented ones.
While the goal of these raids is to round up illegal workers, Myanmar refugees and asylum seekers are sometimes caught in the mix. They will be sent to prison, then to detention camps and risk repatriation. Their only hope is for UNHCR to intervene by appealing for a stay of deportation for refugees holding a UNHCR card.
And these raids, bear in mind, even UNHCR are not aware about when it happens or where it's happening, so they have to look up to the news or wait for some reporter to call them and ask what's the latest on this raid that's happened, so they don't know what's happening on the ground as well.
Pastor Kam Lian Mang provides religious leadership to over 200 refugees and asylum seekers from Myanmar's Chin state. In recent months, there has been a surge in desperate followers, hoping he can help them locate their incarcerated loved ones.
This is the one who are in jail in Malaysia. I got it 53 people right now in jail. So some people are still lost, still we cannot contact. Some are in seminary camp, some are in Bukit Jalil camp, some are in Robi, different things. So I do not exactly, I cannot say it. We are really different place, different jail camp.
It's a race against time for community leaders like Pastor Kam to locate the detainees before they are repatriated back to Myanmar. Insight obtained footage that showed the verification process at Juru detention camp in Penang.
Hi, Sofitan. Just nak check yang 4 orang ni adakah dalam? Tak ada relationship, tapi kita kawan sebab dia punya community dari KL. Dia tanya. Di Myanmar.
Yang mana ada?
Ada.
Ada memang ada sini immigration juru. Sini segala backup je boleh call lah antara dua. Ini memang record dia memang ada dalam sistem lah. Okey, ini bahagian unit penguasa. Sebab daripada keluar penjara, diorang akan hantar dekat sini. Berapa lama saya tak pasti.
Kat dalam tu macam penjara ke macam dormitory?
Benda tu kita tak boleh bagi tahu dekat public.
Okay.
Access to the camps is becoming increasingly difficult.
The other major area that UNHCR used to play a role in Malaysia, which it no longer does, is actually providing visits to the detention centres. UNHCR used to do that, they used to have access, but in August 2019, if I'm not mistaken, that's the time when, for some reason, UNHCR was also stopped from doing that. Since then, they have not been able to determine whether the detention centres are, adequately providing any kinds of assistance and aid to the refugees.
The government position has been very clear that we want as much as possible to assist, if not in a big way, at least in a small way. To find means and ways to further improve the education of the children of the refugees. And this is not limited only to the Rohingyas. And this is not just about Rohingya or refugees in Malaysia. So we would like to play that kind of role, and we are hoping that we can actually realize this objective as soon as possible.
But for some observers, actions by the immigration authorities do not match these promises.
I think what is worrying is the agreement that the immigration department and the ministry and the Myanmar government in deporting Myanmar refugees from Malaysia. Most recently, members of the army who had left the army, who went AWOL, and some of them were also members of the CDM, Civil Disobedience Movement in Myanmar. So essentially, these people will be crucified when they go back.
The CDM, or Myanmar's Civil Disobedience Movement, is a popular resistance movement. It once boasted more than 360,000 members who chose to walk away from their state jobs in protest of the coup. John, an alias, once counted himself among their number. While John has so far avoided arrest and deportation, others have not been as lucky.
Malaysia naga pensilo chabai bai lo tadara re shinkha puthara jaya risk khema hin lo ka bai ya ga ning lo ara le la lo ko ni tong lo tadang thau de kha twen lo chabai lo ka bai Yaga Krolo and Naga, the Don Kraraka, a show Kentarabai. Yaga Krolo and Naga, the Don Kraraka, a show Kentarabai. Yaga Shogari and Guma Buddha.
In a worst-case scenario, people like John will be convicted for treason upon return to Myanmar, a crime which carries the death penalty. According to Nini Luin, who runs an alliance for refugees from the Rakhine State in Myanmar, CDM refugees are especially vulnerable to deportation.
Myanmar military leaderships are not very happy with the military depicting, and then he wants to discourage his army, navy, air force, and police don't run away from his posts. So then they are closely working and giving instruction to the Myanmar embassy, especially the military attaché. So then the military attaché has the intelligence community, and they do have informer across the Malaysia to looking for the defectors, government CDMs, and also who are accused as being rebels run away to Malaysia.
Nini's organization tries to save deportees by obtaining a stay of deportation with the help of Malaysian lawyers like Sin Yew. He has worked in human rights law for a decade, representing asylum seekers and refugees fighting deportation.
Immigration acts of deportation, it can be challenged, and there's a lot of hurdles that needs to be crossed. So it's really the undocumented ones that are really at risk. And for every one application that we do file, there's at least, 50, 100 others out there who we don't know who they are, and they're just being deported without any challenge to a deportation order. More often than not, it's an uphill task for those asylum seekers as well as refugees.
We live in fear every day. We don't know when they will come and arrest us.
When did the mood against refugees turn in Malaysia? Towards deporting refugees, even in the face of death. Malaysia has a reputation for tolerance towards asylum seekers and refugees. Before COVID, it provided safe haven to the largest population of Rohingya refugees in ASEAN. But things started to change with the pandemic.
COVID really threw a spanner in the works amongst those who are working on these issues. And it's very clear that the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen that spike in more xenophobic sentiments, and I can't say whether this is exclusive to Malaysia, but it's clear when there's some kind of security threat, local communities feel that the available, perhaps scarce resources need to be allocated more exclusively for local communities as opposed to providing these resources to foreign communities.
When COVID-19 hit Malaysia, unfortunately, the first story that came out was a group of people who went to a particular mosque somewhere in the Klang Valley got COVID. And the story goes that some of them were Rohingyas. I do not know how far this is true, but this story went around.
Since the pandemic, raids and deportations of Myanmar refugees have stepped up, contrary to Malaysia's opposition to Myanmar's military takeover.
In ASEAN, if we look at the foreign minister was fighting against military coup, but that, and down here, they are still connecting and then still doing like some deportations with the Myanmar embassy, working together.
The fact that as far as the foreign ministry is concerned, we have never changed our methodology. We have not changed our approach. I think our officers have been very diligent in looking at ways and means to facilitate the best of ways to attend to whoever that come to our shores.
At the height of the COVID pandemic, the Malaysian public feared that large migrant communities would be a vector for the virus.
What we saw was these xenophobic sentiments, questioning why they're taking up resources. The last few years has also coincided with our own Malaysian domestic political landscape, which has been fluctuating and unstable, unfortunately. And because of this, it has been very easy, I think, to channel these energies towards a common external threat, real or imagined, right?
Yeah, it's very sad being a political tools, being a guest, unwelcome guest. There are so many, of course, like discriminations, and then when we become like a tool for their political benefits, it's very sad. It means they do not respect our rights and they do not see us as human beings, and they never think about their our struggles and our difficulty.
But there is change in Malaysia. The country went to the polls on November 19, 2022. The elections returned a new multi-party government led by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. He came to power on a promise of a more tolerant and inclusive vision for Malaysia. Some in the refugee communities hope this will extend to them as well.
There was a time when we put a moratorium in sending people back to Myanmar. That I understand is lapsed now, but I'm hopeful that the new cabinet or the new government will continue with the moratorium so that we do not deport people back.
But this is a new government, it's just only a month old. So I think you need to give it a bit more time for it to gel together.
On December 3rd, 2022, a new cabinet was sworn in.
The government hasn't actually said anything about it yet, to my understanding. The Home Minister as well has a lot to learn and probably something that he needs to grapple with very quickly. So I look forward to seeing what the new government has to say and do about the refugee status in Malaysia.
But while the new government finds its feet, the deportations have continued. According to public posts on Malaysia's immigration social channels, the most recent happened on January 7th, 2023.
I think we have some better hope from the new government, but then it's sad. There's always immigration raids. We always hear that there's a raid, and even like the last night happens, I think they arrest around 555 people. So yeah, I think the rates increase.
I think there are different motivations involved. When it comes to foreign affairs, especially the former foreign minister, his position is very clear that we need to support NUG, we need to support the refugees. But the Home Affairs is organized a bit differently. They are organized based on law, order, security, and so on. So they don't see beyond that. So I think basically there must be a transfer of information, thinking, and some kind of an understanding that has to prevail.
On the one hand, we would like to say that we want to be, we want to practice human rights, we want to uphold the values of human rights. But of course, there are other factors that are beyond our control, and in particular beyond our ministry. There are certain laws that we have to abide. There are the immigration laws, there are other rules and regulations.
In human rights lawyer Sin Yew's experience, the eyes of the law often do not distinguish refugees from illegal workers.
As far as the government is concerned, legally, they are all offenders of immigration laws in Malaysia because you would be committing a criminal offence. So ministers, stakeholders, members of the justice process in Malaysia, they're not aware that there is a very real problem going on in Malaysia where there's a lot of families around coming in from the borders, staying here because they are escaping what is happening in their country. Because if they are aware of what's really happening on the ground, then I would think that, given the benefit of the doubt, they wouldn't do certain things. Like, for example, deporting back refugees to imminent danger.
But I think this is where the Prime Minister should step in and bring about some kind of coordination. The new Prime Minister's commitment to human rights has to speak for something.
Despite the risks of deportation, many Myanmar refugees continue to make the arduous journey towards safe haven in Malaysia. A month on, and May 2 and Anthony are still waiting for a response from the UNHCR. Meanwhile, May 2 had gotten married in Malaysia. As Malaysia grapples with the influx of Myanmar refugees, registration with the UNHCR is the first step to a solution. A UNHCR card allows the refugees to seek resettlement in other countries. But due to a large volume of cases, complex relationships with host countries, and the need to navigate local legislation, the UNHCR resettlement process can take years to complete, leaving many asylum seekers and refugees frustrated.
I think UNHCR is a victim of their own success because they have been successful in the past. And because of that, there's this expectation on them from asylum seekers and refugees, as well as NGOs and lawyers, that they'll be able to help. But that expectation is probably different from what the reality is. No funding, difficult to speak to government.
While their applications are processed by the UNHCR, community-based refugee groups like the Alliance for Chin Refugees try to provide support in the interim. They help collect information of asylum seekers and print it on their own membership cards.
So we issue them these cards. This is community cards just for their documentation purposes. So, to make sure they are under our protection. So if you look at the cards at the back, you can see telephone numbers. So we also include UNHCR contact numbers and everything because, all our community offices under the recognitions of UNHCR. So even UNHCR give us protection letters and everything. So we have to include those kind of things.
While such cards have no legal validity, they are one of the few ways for the refugee community to track their own in Malaysia.
because we want to know who they are. We ask them all their data and then their information and everything, and then we keep in the office, and then we issue them to say that this is our people. So if they dies, or if they are in the hospital or any police can contact to their respective community office for further assistance.
But such practices have come under scrutiny by the authorities. On January 7, 2023, the Immigration Department conducted a raid on what they describe as a card-issuing syndicate. The authorities claim the syndicate is exploiting the refugees, collecting 500 ringgit for the processing of their UNHCR applications and the issuance of a community card. But other community leaders claim that these collections are vital funds used for things like refugee aid.
We are providing social services, health services, helping funds, educating the kids, and controlling educating our members to follow Malaysian laws and respect Malaysian cultures and religions every day, because we are responding 60,000-70,000 people everywhere in Malaysia, because none of our NGOs are funding us, UNHCR doesn't know fund us, and none of the international community fund us. So that's why they collect that money and helping their own people.
The Malaysia government has offered its own system of accounting called the Tracking Refugees Information System, or TRIS. It came online in July 2022 under the previous Home Minister Hamzah Zainuddin. On its website, TRIS is described as a compulsory registration scheme for every UNHCR cardholder and asylum seeker residing in Malaysia. Registration costs 500 Malaysian ringgit and affords the asylum seeker an MyRC identification card. The card will allow the registered individuals to stay temporarily in Malaysia based on the validity of the card issued by the government. It is not known if the current administration will continue the TRIS. With the political uncertainty in Malaysia, which saw a change of 4 prime ministers in 3 years, many refugees are apprehensive.
Okay, a cabinet will say, okay, we're going to issue our refugee card and give them the right to work. Then the next time the government will change, they will say, we don't know this.
Why do we need the card? Because we want to start allowing people to work. We want to start giving or rendering services. Number one, it is a good policy because it will then show that we are really humanitarian in our approach, that we allow refugees to work in Malaysia. Number two, it fits very well into our policy of using foreign workers. So there is a lot of value if we were to allow them to work.
IDEAS wrote a public policy paper in 2019 where we argued that if refugees were granted the right to work, this could contribute as much as 5 billion ringgit to our GDP.
It'll be challenging, but I think the value added of involving refugees in the labour market will be a big one. And that's something that will benefit Malaysia. We have seen the worst, we haven't seen the best. Let's work on the best now.
2 years on from the coup, and the situation in Myanmar remains fraught. Even though the country is expected to hold elections later this year, James does not expect the violence at home to end. In the meantime, he hopes to complete his law degree soon and help others find safe haven here in Malaysia.
I won't stop pushing the government and UNHCR for refugees right here because I feel like this task is given by God for my people. Yeah, so I don't think I will stop.
But what he truly longs for is, perhaps, to one day return home.
I always hope to have a stable and peaceful country, and I want to see my people as a tourist, not as refugees anymore.